Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars is a 1991 animated series based on a comic of the same name that, needless to say, is another show that I have very little to talk about. Yep, I'm basically pulling an over the garden wall on this show, where this review will end up being straight to the point, because of how very few materials there is to work with. Now, this review comes as a request from someone that I'll keep his name out of my mouth for reasons that I won't disclose right now. In 2022, he requested me to review Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, and I said that I would. However, for a while at the time, I ended up putting this review to the side, mainly because of the fact that the first half of 2022 was absolutely exhausting for me, as well as getting writer's block, and occupying myself extremely hard with the spin-off series Sean's Yearly Reviews. However, even though yes, for personal reasons, I'm not gonna mention him, I did promise him that I would get around to reviewing this show at some point, and a promise is a promise. And I wanted to get this show right out of the way so that I could get to watching the shows that are on my binge list. And now that I finished watching Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, what do I think about it? I'll be completely honest when I say this right now. When I first started watching a few episodes back in 2022, before I got really sidetracked, I thought that my overall thoughts on the show just being fine was due to the fact that 2022 burned me out. But now that I fully decided to watch all the episodes, when I'm in the calm state of mind that I'm in right now, that wasn't the burnt state of mind talking. Those are my actual thoughts on this show. So, what is this show about? Well, the best way to sum up the show is this. Imagine taking an Isekai and fuse it with Star Wars. And that's basically what you get with Bucky O'Hare. The show, from what I've been hearing, is based on a comic, and from what I've been hearing during a voice call with
name redacted,
from what I remember, is that there are some very notable differences between the comic and the show. One of them being, for instance, in the first episode, where the chimp character named Bruce ended up getting transported to another dimension. In the comic, he ends up getting killed off. End of story. But similar to what I did with Thundercats Roar, in regards to me reviewing this show, I'm not going to judge it by how it is as an adaptation, I'm judging it by its own merit. The plot of this show is extremely simple. This rabbit named Bucky O'Hare and his gang of animal buddies basically does the exact same thing that the title of the show suggests, in that the characters basically go to war with their enemies, the Toads. And that's pretty much the entire show, up until the last episode, where we're given an ending about Bucky O'Hare's home planet being in everlasting peace thanks to him. Now, at first, I thought that me struggling to find very many things to say about this show was because watching through shows like Code Lyoko and Kappa Mikey took the most out of me, since both of those shows took me nearly half a year to complete, since they both had more than the average lengths of a TV show. But I ended up being proven wrong with some of the animated movies that I ended up reviewing on my channel, like Rock Dog or the Tom and Jerry movie from 2021. And then when going into watching this show, I proved to myself that it wasn't the burnout that was talking. One of the major issues that I have with this show is a very similar problem that I had with Power Players, where throughout my watch through of each episode of the series, the show fails to really get me invested with what's going on, or do something noteworthy. There's nothing in this show that is noticeably good, except for the action sequences, but as proven by what I said towards Power Players, that's not really something that improves the overall quality, while at the exact same time, there's nothing really bad about it either. And that is what makes reviewing something bland a lot harder to talk about than something that I dislike, because I'd have something to say about the show or movie, as opposed to something like this. Another major issue that I have with this show is that for a series that is pretty much what you could consider as one of the first Isekai shows, at least in the United States, it does very little to really take advantage of the fact that it's an Isekai show, and that the character that this show is basically pulling an Isekai with does very little in the show itself. Willie DeWitt is not a very interesting character in the slightest. He's basically just the genius character that tags along with the others. He's good at repairing things, but there is literally no point in having this be an isekai if Willie is able to go back into the real world at any time he needs to. In fact, you could literally turn him into an animal and have him be a regular engineer for the team, and literally nothing would change at all. And in fact, for most of the show, he hardly has any sort of purpose to really be in this show. Comparing this show to its younger siblings real quick, Amphibia and the Owl House, what makes those shows work is that while yes, you could have hypothetically made Anne and Luz always be a part of the worlds that they were teleported to, they served a purpose in the shows that they came from. And what's more, Anne and Luz ended up being the ones who saved their world. Willie, on the other hand, does not. In fact, for most of the show, Willie takes a back seat most of the time, and no joke, does not start becoming important until the 9th episode of the series. But by then, it's far too late to really start doing this, because the fatal issue that they made in this show is that Bucky O'Hara himself is entirely competent and barely so much as get captured like Ida from the Owl House did, or how Sprig, Polly, and Hop Hop did in Amphibia. But that's kind of the nature of this show, and why I honestly struggle to really find all that much to really say about it. This show is very much a product of its time. As in, the show was still sort of in the era before the animation renaissance of the 90s kicked in. This show only premiered a month after the first 3 Nicktoons premiered, and animation does take a while to get done. So this show was probably done when the trends of the 80s were about ready to be over. You could probably tell since the show is kind of similar to TMNT, which was another action show about anthro-animal characters. And it kind of shows here, given that the characters are uninteresting, and the animation does have that kind of feeling in it. Although, a lot of the ideas in this show I have seen done better elsewhere, but it was from a different era, so I can't be too mad at it. But then again, the Nickelodeon version of Doug came out the exact same year as this show, and similarly did things that other shows would do better later on. But unlike Doug, I'm pretty sure that shows like Amphibia and the Owl House would have existed even without this show. But I don't want to be too harsh on this show because it is generally harmless, and unlike most of the other shows that I reviewed on my channel, this one doesn't have anything that personally bothered me, but it got up to the point where I just couldn't really write anything of note about this show because there was just nothing to really say about it. But even if I do consider this show to be average, I do have interest in seeing what a modern reboot would be like if this show was made today, since animation had come a long way since 1991, and with the right crew, there could be a chance for it to turn out amazing. DuckTales 2017 was able to do this, so I'm pretty sure that Bucky O'Hare could do this as well. So, in regards to Sean's network reviews, obviously speaking, this show is better than Power Players and Clutter, because I could get through this entire show without getting frustrated, but I doubt that I would really watch this show again. If any of what I said about this show interests you in any sort of way, this show might be up your alley. Though, according to an individual whom I'll nickname Anon Pink, this show is actually considered a cult classic and a show that was cut too early. If you ever wanted to see what an animated Star Wars show would have been like if it was released in the late 80s to early 90s, this show may get your attention, but given that I got sidetracked while trying to watch through every episode until just recently, I have the feeling that this exact same thing will happen again after this review is over. I mean, the theme song is an absolute banger, admittedly.
Bucky! Captain Bucky O'Hare! Mutants and aliens and toads beware! You're looking for adventure, well this is it! With Jenny, Deadeye, Blinky, and Willie to win!
But as for the series, I'm just gonna stick with Amphibia instead of this. But if you want a much better version of this show, Sonic Sat AM is basically that, given that the characters are given more screen time, as well as having more character development. While this show is just kind of forgettable.
Everything